For decades, science fiction has carried the reputation of being imaginative, visionary, and boldly speculative. But what if some of its most iconic films didn't come from the writers credited on screen or even from within the walls of the studios that produced them? What if the stories that changed the genre forever were born from manuscripts that were never meant to be discovered, drafts that materialized without authors or pages quietly passed from hand to hand with no trace of their origin? Hollywood's archives are full of strange anomalies, photocopied screenplays without metadata, early revisions with handwriting that no one can identify, and story outlines that appear in studio records but vanish from every official history. Directors and producers have occasionally hinted carefully reluctantly that the version they received wasn't the version the studio expected. Some claim they were handed drafts by individuals who were never seen again. Others describe scenes written in a voice so unlike the listed writers that no one knows who or what actually composed them. Across fan forums and collector communities, fragments of these lost texts still surface: alternate scenes, darker endings, or entire subplots that were never filmed, raising questions about the unseen minds shaping these stories. And when fans compare these drafts to the finished films, they find something unsettling. Some of the most groundbreaking ideas in sci-fi appear fully formed in documents with no author, no paper trail, and no confirmed point of origin. Tonight, we examine 15 works of science fiction built on foundations the public was never supposed to know existed, films whose earliest versions are shrouded in confusion, contradiction, or deliberate silence. These are not simply alternate drafts. They are lost fingerprints of creators who may never have intended to be found. 1. Edge of Tomorrow, the draft that was erased before the film was finalized. While Edge of Tomorrow is officially based on the novel, all you need is kill. Rumors of a missing pre-production draft have persisted since the film's release. This manuscript, referenced obliquely in internal memos, but absent from all formal archives, reportedly offered a version of the story far closer to the novel's sense of fatalistic recursion. The draft featured extended sequences of tactical evolution, deeper psychological consequences of endless looping, and a far bleaker tone than the final film. What differentiates this draft from others is its apparent disappearance. Several staff members claim to have reviewed it during early development, noting that specific action beats such as the shifting battlefield geometry and non-linear memory flashes were described in vivid detail. Yet none of these reviewers could later produce the document, and no digital record of it was found on the studio's servers. A handwritten production note even referenced elements from the erased version, implying that, despite its absence, the draft influenced creative decisions. Some speculate the document might have been an early adaptation attempt commissioned from a writer who ultimately left the project. Others believe it may have been intentionally removed after legal concerns arose regarding the rights to early interpretations of the source material. Still others argue it was simply misplaced during a chaotic restructuring of the script department. Regardless of its true origin, the Phantom Draft casts a long shadow over Edge of Tomorrow. Several of the film's most memorable mechanics, its looping intensity, its overwhelming sense of dread, and its puzzle-like progression, resemble descriptions from the missing manuscript more than any surviving draft. This suggests that a foundational layer of the film may have been built from a version that no longer officially exists, penned by a writer no longer seen, remembered, or credited. 2. Moon, the script that revealed more than anyone intended. Moon stands as one of the most tightly constructed sci-fi narratives of the 2000s, yet its origins may be far more convoluted than the clean authorship credited to Duncan Jones and Nathan Parker. Several individuals tied to early development recall reviewing a draft distinct from all known versions that contain deeper explorations of cloning ethics, corporate concealment, and psychological fragmentation. This draft, often referred to informally as the extended blueprint, included entire scenes that do not appear in any officially archived material. Descriptions from those who handled the blueprint mention a chilling level of detail, including logs of prior clone iterations and the more elaborate depiction of the lunar base's hidden compartments. The tone was more despairing, less restrained, and stylistically unlike either Jones or Parker. Some sequences appeared so specific, so disturbingly grounded in real biomedical processes that even staff questioned whether the writer had access to restricted scientific documents. When Jones was asked about the rumored draft, he acknowledged reading unusual early materials but did not specify their origin. Studio logs contain no entry for an additional writer or consultant, and development archives show a gap in the documented timeline that aligns with the circulation of the rumored blueprint. The oddest detail concerns a handful of visual and narrative elements in the final film that seem to match descriptions from the missing draft, not from any known script. These include the repetition of subliminal audio cues, the glimpses of failed predecessors, and the disquieting symmetry in the base's architecture. Whether this blueprint was an abandoned internal exploration, an unsolicited submission folded into development, or something more quietly suppressed, its disappearance continues to unsettle archivists. It suggests that Moon's haunting elegance may not have originated solely from its credited creators, but from a voice that slipped temporarily into the project, leaving behind echoes impossible to trace. 3. Sunshine, the anonymous rewrite that shifted the film's trajectory. During the development of Sunshine, Alex Garland's script went through numerous revisions, but one version continues to puzzle researchers and production veterans, an anonymous rewrite delivered late in pre-production. This mysterious document supposedly restructured the film's thematic core, emphasizing metaphysical decay, psychological breakdown under solar exposure, and a more abstract interpretation of the Icarus missions. Though no official logs acknowledge the rewrite, several crew members remember handling a draft that did not match Garland's or Boyle's style. Accounts from those who encountered the manuscript describe it as stylistically detached, clinical, almost scientific, with long passages detailing the destabilizing influence of radiation on human perception. Some sequences proposed in the document align eerily well with the final film's unsettling visual language. For example, the recurring motif of faces dissolving in glare appears nowhere in known drafts but matches descriptions in the anonymous rewrite. Attempts to trace the document yielded nothing. No email headers, no file history, no physical signature. A production assistant later speculated that the rewrite might have been produced by a consultant specializing in astrophysics and human cognition, hired briefly and then removed from the official record. However, no consultant with relevant expertise appears in contract archives. What deepens the mystery is how closely the final film adheres to the pacing and thematic evolution described in the missing draft. The slow breakdown of rationality, the blurring of identity aboard the Icarus II, and the shift toward transcendental horror all mirror elements allegedly found in the rewrite but absent from other recorded versions. 4. The Prestige, the writer no one remembered hiring. Behind the intricate illusions of The Prestige lies a lesser-known mystery involving a draft written by someone no one on the production officially remembered hiring. This particular manuscript appeared during the adaptation phase, containing expanded backstories, alternative rivalry arcs, and thematic explorations of duplication that differed from both Christopher Nolan's and Jonathan Nolan's recognized work. The draft bore no contract attachment, no payroll record, and no correspondence trail, merely a printed document with annotations in a hand unfamiliar to the writing team. Individuals who reportedly handled the draft recall a distinctly different narrative tone, colder, more mechanical, focused on the psychological fracturing of the central characters. It proposed alternate sequences involving early-stage experiments, uncanny mirror imagery, and a more disturbing interpretation of Tesla's machine ideas that closely resemble scenes ultimately filmed, though no known draft includes them in that form. When script supervisors attempted to log the manuscript, they found it didn't match any commissioned writer. Notes in the production binder even referred to the contributor as the outside writer, though no such collaborator appears in studio contracts. Eventually, the document was removed from circulation with little explanation, replaced by later drafts attributed solely to the Nolan brothers. The most curious detail comes from a former assistant who claimed that certain scenes credited to the Nolans echoed almost verbatim the structure proposed in the anonymous manuscript. Whether this indicates influence or coincidence remains unresolved. Some believe the draft was produced by a consultant hired informally and later uncredited. Others suggest it was an experimental rewrite delivered without acknowledgement. 5. Looper the draft with no metadata. When Rian Johnson's Looper entered early development, a peculiar phenomenon occurred within the script department. A draft appeared in the system with no metadata. No timestamp. No author ID. No version number. Yet, the document was complete, containing an outline of Johnson's paradox-driven narrative character arcs and even several action sequences nearly identical to what appeared in the final film. Staff initially assumed it was an early Johnson draft that had failed to upload correctly. But when Johnson reviewed the file, he reportedly insisted he had never written that version. What distinguished the anonymous draft was its structure. The pacing narrative flow and emotional beats mirrored the finished film almost precisely, but the stylistic voice differed sharply from Johnson's known work. Dialogue rhythms were more fragmented, world-building details more clinical. Some scenes diverged significantly, particularly a chilling sequence describing the long-term consequences of time loop instability, but their conceptual DNA resurfaced later in production. Attempts to retrieve the file's upload history resulted in a technical impossibility. The system listed the file as having no origin point. Some IT staff suggested a corruption anomaly. Others believed the document may have been imported from an external source without proper registration. But speculation grew when several early crew members recalled conversations referencing ideas that appeared only in the metadata lacking draft. When production moved forward, the anonymous document was quietly removed from the system. Yet, fragments of its influence persisted, woven into character motivations and thematic subtext. Johnson later joked about the mystery draft in an interview, calling it a ghost in the machine, though he offered no further explanation. 6. Interstellar, the unverified pages in the Nolan archives. Before Interstellar became the sweeping odyssey known today, whispers circulated about an unusual packet of pages discovered in the Nolan production archives. These pages, sometimes referred to by staff as the unverified set, did not appear in any version tracking logs and were not attributed to Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan, or Kip Thorne. Yet they contained elaborate concepts, most notably a more intricate depiction of the fifth-dimensional tesseract and a radically different interpretation of time dilation that predated the formal scientific consultations credited in the film's development. Assistants who claimed to have seen the pages described them as unnervingly polished. They included vivid descriptions of gravitational anomalies, emotional beats that paralleled scenes later filmed, and alternative motivations for Cooper's journey rendered in a voice distinct from any known Nolan draft. Even stranger were handwritten side notes in a style no one recognized proposing structural changes that subtly align with decisions made during late-stage rewrites long after the mysterious pages had supposedly vanished. Attempts to trace the origin of the packet led nowhere. It had no associated email chain, no upload history, and no physical signature. Some crew believed it might have been an early discarded collaboration attempt. Others speculated it could have been an anonymous scientific contribution, something slipped into the workflow by someone who wished to remain uncredited. But the most provocative theory suggests that the pages were intentionally removed once Nolan and Thorne formalized their approach, perhaps to avoid confusion or perhaps because the ideas they contained were uncomfortably close to the final cinematic reality. Whether mere rumor or evidence of an unseen collaborator, the unverified pages leave a lingering question: how much of Interstellar's cosmic ambition came from Hans Hollywood, never acknowledged? 7. Minority Report the rewrite that no one logged. While Minority Report is widely recognized as a polished collaboration between Steven Spielberg and Scott Frank, the path to its final screenplay is far murkier than official accounts suggest. Studio records and early production memos reference a rewrite that appeared late in development, a version packed with structural adjustments and philosophical expansions, but the draft itself is absent from all archival logs. No writer ever claimed responsibility, and no payment record corresponds to the work implied by the notes. According to individuals who worked in the script department, this mysterious rewrite contained a markedly different interpretation of pre-crime technology, focusing less on spectacle and more on the ethical collapse surrounding predictive justice. Entire sequences mentioned in the memos, including an extended exploration of discarded precogs and abandoned future crime prototypes, do not appear in any known draft. Yet pieces of these concepts subtly echo through the film, suggesting that someone integrated elements from the missing rewrite into later revisions. The more archivists investigated, the stranger the situation became. Version tracking software from the time shows a sudden gap, an unexplained jump between two draft numbers, leaving a void where the anonymous rewrite should have been. Staffers recalled reviewing pages covered with handwritten annotations unrelated to either Frank's or Spielberg's usual notes. Some proposed that the rewrite was submitted by an uncredited consultant hired off books, while others suspected it was a reworked treatment mistakenly folded into the development process. The lack of attribution has sparked ongoing debate. Did the draft's author request anonymity? Was it a studio experiment abandoned midway? Or was the rewrite intentionally removed because its ideas diverged too sharply from the film's intended direction? 8. Event Horizon, the script lost before anyone could read it. The mythology surrounding Event Horizon already borders on the legendary, but beneath the stories of missing footage and destroyed effects reels lies an even more peculiar mystery: the existence of an early script draft that vanished before production fully began. Multiple crew members, including effects artists and assistant editors, have mentioned an unofficial draft that predated the shooting script. It reportedly contained elaborate depictions of the ship's descent into chaos, including detailed sequences set within the dimensional rift scenes far more extreme and unsettling than what audiences ultimately saw. What makes this draft especially strange is how its disappearance shaped the film. Production notes from early creative meetings reference ideas that align with descriptions of the lost manuscript despite no surviving script containing those details. According to anecdotal accounts, the document arrived unbound, uncredited, and without studio markings. Some believed it was an exploratory treatment commissioned quietly and never acknowledged. Others insisted it came from a source completely disconnected from official development. Archivists, who later attempted to track the draft, encountered contradictions. Some staff remembered reading it, others recalled hearing about it but never seeing a copy. A handful claimed it was removed deliberately during the film's intense post-production overhaul, a casualty of the studio's attempt to regain control over a project spiraling beyond expectations. 9. Donnie Darko, The Vanishing Revision X7. Among cult sci-fi mysteries, few are as persistent as the rumor surrounding Donnie Darko's so-called Revision X7, a draft referenced by early crew members, but never officially cataloged. According to interviews buried in fan forums and convention recordings, Revision X7 was a darker, more metaphysical version of the script that circulated briefly during pre-production. It allegedly contained extended descriptions of tangent universes, alternate timelines, and coded dialogue sequences that never appeared in any publicly acknowledged draft. The strangest part, no credited writer or studio representative ever claimed authorship of the revision or even remembered submitting it. Individuals who reportedly handled the manuscript describe handwritten notes along the margins in an unfamiliar style suggesting deliberate changes to character motivations and the cosmic mechanisms behind the film's narrative loops. These elements would later surface indirectly in the director's cut and expanded universe materials, raising suspicions that the unseen draft played a larger role than anyone admitted. When fans attempted to trace the revision through the studio's archival system, they found no digital footprint, no scan, and no listing in the version tracking logs. Yet production diaries from key staff mention X7 adjustments, as though the draft had been actively referenced during rewrites. Its disappearance shortly before filming has fueled theories ranging from clerical mishaps to intentional erasure, perhaps, to avoid confusion over its origins. Some enthusiasts believe Revision X7 was an anonymous contribution from a collaborator who later withdrew. Others argue it might have been an early exploration by Richard Kelly that he later abandoned. But the most enigmatic possibility is that the revision came from outside the official writing process, entirely an unsolicited, uncatalogued document that briefly shaped the film before melting into obscurity. Today, nothing remains of X7 but whispers and memories, leaving fans to wonder if Donnie Darko's haunting complexity owes part of its structure to a draft that was never meant to be found. 10. 2001 Space Odyssey, the draft that shouldn't exist. The creation of 2001, A Space Odyssey, is often portrayed as a seamless collaboration between Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, yet hidden beneath that official narrative is a lingering anomaly, a draft referenced in early correspondence that neither Clarke nor Kubrick ever acknowledged writing. This manuscript, known only through second-hand descriptions, appeared during the film's conceptual phase and contained thematic structures far more advanced than anything the duo had publicly discussed. Those who claim to have seen the draft describe it as unsettlingly complete. It included early visions of the monolith's purpose, cryptic notes about extraterrestrial intervention, and a framework for the film's transcendent finale details that only fully solidified much later in production. Even more baffling, several scenes described in the final cut correspond more closely to elements from this phantom document than to any surviving revisions known to scholars. Clarke's journals briefly mention a peculiar early outline that he could not place. Kubrick reportedly dismissed inquiries about the draft entirely. When MGM archivists attempted to track its provenance decades later, they discovered gaps in the cataloging system during the film's development period, missing entries, altered metadata, and a handwritten note simply reading removed for consolidation. No such consolidation ever took place. Some speculate the draft may have been an experimental treatment by a studio consultant whose contribution was later erased. Others believe it was an abandoned outline Clarke himself wrote and later disowned. But a more haunting theory persists within fan and academic circles that the Phantom Outline was not a draft created for the film, but the document that inspired it, an artifact Kubrick encountered, adapted, and then quietly allowed to vanish. 11. Dark City, the script revision with no fingerprints. Dark City has always existed on the fringes of mainstream sci-fi, but behind its creation lies a puzzle far stranger than its shifting urban labyrinths. During the production phase, staff members reported encountering a draft revision that no credited writer, producer, or studio executive seemed to have created. This document, unsupported by any version tracking records, contained restructured scenes, altered character motivations, and atmospheric descriptions that would later appear almost verbatim in the final cut. Yet not a single person in the production chain claimed responsibility. According to those who handled it, the anonymous revision displayed an uncanny understanding of the thematic core the filmmakers were still developing. It emphasized memory extraction, architectural manipulation, and the uncanny stillness of a city built on shifting logic ideas that would later define Dark City's cult identity. But the strangest aspect was the handwriting found in the margins, small cryptic side notes, in a style no one recognized, offering alterations that matched rewrites later made on set. Attempts to trace the revision back through the studio's workflow led nowhere. It wasn't filed through standard channels, wasn't tagged in the script database, and wasn't attached to any writer payment record. For a time, production staff quietly speculated that someone outside the credited team had contributed significantly to the film's conceptual direction. Years later, when questioned in interviews, director Alex Proyas acknowledged the existence of odd early materials, though he avoided specifics. Some fans believe the anonymous revision may have been authored by a writer who wished to remain hidden. Others argue it was a remnant of a rejected draft mistakenly integrated into development. But a persistent minority claims the document was intentionally purged once it had served its purpose. 12. The Matrix, the draft, no one would admit writing. Long before The Matrix reshaped cyberpunk cinema, a strange draft circulated quietly inside Warner Bros., a manuscript that none of the Wachowskis' credited materials seemed to match. Archivists, who later reviewed the studio's development logs, discovered references to an unidentified script that arrived months before the first confirmed Wachowski draft. Its origin unknown, its author unlisted. Yet fragments of this mysterious document echo unmistakably through the final film. According to individuals familiar with the early production process, the anonymous script contained a raw outline of a simulated world humanity imprisoned by unseen forces and a protagonist whose awakening threatened the system itself. These concepts were present, yes, but in forms almost alien, stranger, colder, and more philosophical. Entire sequences described in the lost document mirror scenes that would later appear in the film, though not in any draft officially attributed to the Wachowskis. Even more curious, several action beats and visual motifs, specifically the rooftop chase, the deja vu glitch, and the silent corridors of the agents, align tightly with the unclaimed manuscript. When the Wachowskis were asked about the early draft years later, they denied ever seeing it. Warner Bros. Declined comment, and no copy of the mysterious script has surfaced in public archives. What remains are scattered testimonies from assistant script readers and dev staff who recall handling a document that felt too complete for a submission with no byline. 13. The Terminator, the Unclaimed Origins. Before The Terminator became a cornerstone of sci-fi action, whispers circulated about a script draft that seemed to precede James Cameron's official treatment. This early manuscript, never publicly acknowledged, allegedly contained the skeleton of the time travel narrative the relentless machine antagonist, and the bleak techno-future that later defined the franchise. Yet no one linked to production would confirm where it originated. Some sources describe it as an unsolicited submission that arrived without a cover page or author credit. Others say it surfaced during internal development meetings without anyone claiming responsibility. What sets this draft apart is how closely it aligns with the thematic architecture of the final film, while differing substantially in execution. Reports from individuals who claim to have seen it mention a more surreal timeline structure, dreamlike transitions, and philosophical monologues that never made it past pre-production. The manuscript also included alternate motivations for the machine assassin motives that oddly resemble ideas explored in the franchise many years later. The controversy deepened when comparisons were made between this mystery draft and existing sci-fi literature, most notably the works of Harlan Ellison. Lawsuits and settlements followed, but none fully addressed the underlying question if there was truly an uncredited precursor to Cameron's script who wrote it, and why did it disappear. Studio archives hold no copy today, and personal collections from staff members have never produced one. 14. Alien, the Phantom O'Bannon draft. The mythology of Alien often focuses on its production, struggles its groundbreaking creature design, or Ridley Scott's claustrophobic atmosphere. But insiders know of a far stranger story, the existence of an unverified early draft believed to predate even Dan O'Bannon's widely circulated versions. This so-called Phantom draft, referenced only in interviews and in a handful of forgotten memos, contained structural elements and entire sequences that don't appear in any officially archived script. What makes it even more strange is that no one, not O'Bannon, not producers, not the studio, would acknowledge authorship. Investigators who've reviewed the scarce surviving notes describe a version of the plot that is eerily prophetic. The anonymous draft supposedly included a ritualistic interpretation of the xenomorph life cycle, a direction the franchise wouldn't explore until decades later with Prometheus. It also featured dialogue patterns and character arcs that diverged sharply from anything written by the credited writers. Yet certain lines and dramatic beats found their way into the final film as though absorbed through a process no one documented. Some believe the Phantom draft was an unsolicited submission, misfiled and later mistaken for an internal rewrite. Others argue it originated from a writer who requested anonymity, though no payment records support this theory. The most conspiracy-minded fans claim it disappeared intentionally after influencing the production, leaving behind no trace except memories from a few early staffers. 15. Blade Runner, the draft that didn't belong to anyone. Rumors surrounding Blade Runner have circulated for decades, but none is more persistent than the story of a mysterious early draft that seemed to appear out of thin air. Long before Harrison Ford walked onto set, before the neon rain and replicant philosophy became cinematic canon, there existed a version of the script that no writer has ever claimed. Archivists who've studied the film's development mention a proto-script filled with scenes and monologues that never appeared in any of the officially documented revisions. These pages, typed on a machine that could not be traced to production offices, included a darker, more metaphysical exploration of identity, tone, and structure far removed from Hampton Fancher's credited work. What made this draft unsettling wasn't merely its anonymity, but its detail. The unnamed writer had predicted visual elements Ridley Scott wouldn't conceptualize until much later: rooftop confrontations, intrusive advertising drones, even the emotional trajectory of the replicants. When the final film premiered, fans noticed certain sequences that aligned more closely with descriptions from the unclaimed draft than with any known script version. For years, collectors have attempted to locate the original. The only remaining copy, a degraded photocopy, was reportedly removed from the studio archives during a reorganization in the late 1980 C. Whether misplaced, destroyed, or intentionally erased, no one can say. What lingers is the unnerving idea that one of Sci-Fi's defining works may have been shaped not by the creatives we know, but by a contributor who left behind no identity, no records, and no explanation. A whisper of authorship that slipped into the shadows, leaving the film's legacy forever tied to a draft that may never be recovered. Prometheus, the missing draft that suggested a darker origin. Before Prometheus emerged as a visually striking expansion of the alien mythology, long-standing rumors within production circles spoke of a draft that diverged sharply from the final narrative. Often described by insiders as the architect draft, the manuscript reportedly offered a far more unsettling exploration of the engineers, portraying them not as ambiguous creators, but as architects of a failed evolutionary experiment. The draft circulated briefly among a handful of department leads before disappearing from the studio's official index. Those who recall encountering the architect draft describe a script that leaned heavily into cosmic horror. It emphasized genetic collapse, abandoned experiments, and a chilling depiction of humanity as an accidental byproduct rather than an intentional creation. Scenes allegedly included lost chambers beneath the engineer temple where malformed prototypes drifted in dormant suspension. None of these sequences appear in the verified drafts by Spates or Lindelof, yet fragments of the tone survive faintly within the finished film. Attempts to retrieve the draft years later proved fruitless. The studio denied commissioning any version matching its description, while archivists found only a few incomplete notes referencing alternate origins inconsistent with final direction. Some believe the script was an early speculative treatment submitted anonymously, while others suggest it was intentionally removed because it revealed too much of a direction Ridley Scott ultimately chose to abandon. The disappearance of the architect draft leaves behind a lingering mystery. If the manuscript had survived, would Prometheus have delivered a darker, more terrifying revelation about humanity's creation? The deeper we dig into these vanished drafts and unclaimed manuscripts, the more the boundaries of authorship begin to blur. These films, some of the most influential in sci-fi history, may have been shaped not only by the creators we celebrate, but also by voices that slipped through the cracks, leaving no signatures, no records, and no traceable intent. Perhaps these hidden drafts were accidents of the system. Or perhaps they were never meant to see daylight in the first place. If these unseen hands shaped so much of what we think we understand, what else lies sealed in the vaults, waiting to be discovered or forgotten again?